Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management, and I'm joined today by our presenter and Director of Customer Success, Sarah Mitchell. Today, Sarah will be going over mapping and GPS with Alpha Anywhere, but we're also here to answer your questions, and you could type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. You can also send questions to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. Hello, Sarah, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Just a quick heads up. We're not doing mapping.
We're not going to do mapping. Do we have
No,
a...
no,
Okay.
no. That's an old. We did that a while ago. No, we're gonna talk about the enter code control today.
Oh, that's good because I thought it wasn't. I
Mentioned.
thought something was quite a mess. All right, so don't look at that graphic.
No,
Look at the
no. In
enter code
fact, Scott and
control.
I last week during the webinar, we were trying to figure out how to change that before the webinar started. We couldn't figure it out. So
Oh, well.
I apologize for the confusion. But we should look at changing that
You know,
before
it's all
next week.
it's only going to get better from here, folks. So, yeah.
Oh, no, 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 no. We're gonna let me see here if I can share my screen with you guys.
Yeah.
Pick becoming the master at figuring out which screen I'm sharing.
I'm looking at a documentation screen which says enter
Fantastic.
code
All right.
control.
Yeah, so no PowerPoint today, folks. I'm sorry. I know you love them. We're just gonna work straight out documentation today, and we're gonna talk about the enter code control a bit. But I also wanted to touch on two questions we had last week, and I was stumped, but we figured out the answer. And we had two questions. One was pertaining to someone had created a list control, and they had alternating row colors using even and odd row, even odd colors in the list properties. And so we looked into that and wrote up a documentation article on how you can restore that. So the colors are set using a local style on the list row, which unfortunately overwrites any other background color set using CSS, which is how the web themes work. So we put together this article explaining why that happens and how you can add that color back in and where you need to add that class that you create in the settings. So just shortly, if with the background color getting overwritten, what you need to do is create a new class that specifies the background color that you want, and then you use this important directive, which basically says, I don't care what CSS rules have decided the background color should be based on specificity, which you can learn more about by clicking this link up here. But importance is I want you to use this value. So caution when using important. If you have more than one thing that's important, it's the same setting, then it may not work how you expect it to. But in this case, this is how we're recommending that you get that highlight on hover color back. And we did also include an example component you can download that includes two lists, one that isn't using a hover class that sets the background hover using important, and the other one that does. So I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat window for you guys. Where is chat? There's that one. And then the other one that got asked was float above labels in the CSS grid containers. Why is it getting cut off? Someone did point out in the chat last week, and we just overlooked it. You have to go into the floating label settings, and you have to change where that label floats to inside the control. And once if it's inside the control, then it will appear. So that's all you have to do. This article we added in with the CSS grid container documentation. So if you go down here at the bottom, any related articles on this topic will be found down here, and that's where we added this one. So hopefully that clarifies some things for folks. We also included these links on the YouTube video, and we posted it in the description, so check that out for sure. And now I'd like to get into today's topic, which is the enter code control, which is a new control that we added with the last release, and it's a control that has boxes for capturing a code, so like a 6-digit code or some fixed length value, such as like a 2-factor authentication code, that kind of thing. And so we've added this, and I just wanted to show you guys how you could quickly drop this code, control into our existing login component to use it, as well as discuss how you can use this in other cases for data validation and how you would invoke the shake method, which is demonstrated in this little animation here. You can see it shaking side to side. So we will go to Alpha Anywhere. So we've already got this set up because I didn't want to spend a lot of time walking you guys through how to use the new security genie to set up the security framework to get the login controls and two-factor authentication configured. That's all set up. We've done demonstrations of this in the past. If you have questions, you can certainly write in about it on how to get these controls, how to set up the security framework. But just quickly, we'll look at the web security configuration here. I've got one user, I've got two groups. I manually came in here and created this group called user by going to groups and adding a group and calling it user and checking that box to add this user to it, for those of you who do not know how to do that. And then I also changed the default users that we created to just sarah@example.com. And then I'm going to quickly revert this back to what it was. There we go. So let me save this. Let's go take a look. This is the default. These are the default controls and components we create for you when you enable the web security framework using this quick setup genie, which you can find here, or when you create a new project, there is a prompt to or an option to generate all of these files for you as part of that new project. If we go over here to live test, and we'll look at the login page. So this is live test on the local development server. Here's the login page. Here's my example.com password and login. And I've in advance set this up to use a two-factor authentication code using the Google Authenticator app. Now, this is the default box we give you. It says, please enter your authentication code. There's no indication here as to how long that code needs to be or any type of validation to make sure that you're entering the right values. And if we click submit, code's not valid. With this particular use case here, what I would like everyone to use in my app, my fictional app that I will eventually ship, I want them to all use Google Authenticator. And if you've not used Google Authenticator before, let me see if I can pull up Google Authenticator app here. Here, we'll look at it in Google Play. Let's see if we have any screenshots. There's one. So we'll zoom it in. So this is, if you install the Google Authenticator app on your phone, what it gives you is it gives you this 6-digit code, and on the right-hand side, there's this little wheel that spins. And what it's basically do is it's counting down to a point where that code's going to be invalidated and refreshed. And there's an algorithm used on the back end that that's created using a secret that you set up in the web project properties for the Google Authenticator app that generates that code for your app specifically. But with that that code in the app is what you enter in that box that we were looking at here. Oop, example. So if I go in the Authenticator app, which I set up before the webinar, and we can certainly go through how that is all configured later, and I enter the code that's in there right now and I submit it, this will log me in. I'm authenticated. The piece of information that I had in that two-factor process was the app on my phone. It's on my phone. I set it up when I scanned a QR code when I set up the two-factor authentication preferences here, which you can, I'll just click that button. This is all pre-built for you. You don't have to do anything to get this other than set your secret key in your project properties. But people who have the app would scan this QR code, which would add an entry into their app that they would then read from on the login to set that up. So let's go ahead and leave this. That code in the Authenticator app is always 6 digits. It's always digits. So what I would like to do is, instead of seeing that instead of having this text box, I'd like to put that enter code control in there, then use that instead. So the easiest way to do that is to go into the login component, locate the code control, which you'll start up here. It's down here in this two-factor authentication stage 2. If you can't find it, I believe there's a way to search. Or is it find? It's find. All right, it's a text box. There it is. If you know the name, you can type in code. Go there, go to control. This will pop down on the interface for you and grab it for you. But to make this from that text box to the enter code control, you just need to go up to control type and come down this list. Down here in the bottom area, there's one called enter code. So click OK. That's not going to use the enter code control. And we can, at this point, go look at the control properties to make sure it's configured with the settings that we want. So Google Authenticator is 6 digits. So we have 6 characters that are allowed in the control. It allows digits. We'll leave lower and uppercase and symbols unchecked and just keep all the other defaults here. We'll save this and go to live test again. I'm using live test because you can't test the security framework in live or working preview. And this is all security framework stuff. Just to clarify here. So here's our live test again. Example.com. Log in. So now we have those 6 boxes. So at this point, I'm going to wait a few seconds because the app is showing me that the code's refreshing. But now it's refreshed, so now I can enter my code. Click submit. And we're in. So very easy to set that up. If you use other two-factor authentication methods, you may need to like if they're of varying length, maybe you've given your users different options like email and an SMS message. You may need to do a little extra work on the back end to update how many of those digits are shown if you have different links for those things. But if you don't, if you're only using one method, that's a very quick and easy way to get enter code into your UI. You just change that control type. So the control itself, I want to take some time to just show you guys how to interact with it. It's open-ended at this point. It's not we haven't done any major integrations of its behavior into the UI yet. But if we come in here to new UX control and component and go to add control and search for enter code and add it, we can take a look at some of its settings. So if you double click this control, or you come over to control properties and open it up, this will show you the settings that are available for the enter code control. This one looks like it doesn't have any pre-configured options. So let's see here. I know I must have overwritten it by accident when I double clicked it. But if we come down here, we've documented all the system defaults. So if you ever accidentally blow away your style, then you can grab them out of the documentation. We'll do that. And there's a 2 pixel space between each. So if you don't hook this up to anything, in the case of the login component, we have a button there you click that says submit, and that reads the value out of the code control and then sends that into the two-factor authentication. But just out of the box, this doesn't do anything. So you have to do a little bit of work on your end if you want to put it into anything, any other interface. And the key piece of this is this onComplete function, which gets called when the user has filled out all the data entry values. So we'll make a function here. We'll call it validate. And we'll come over to JavaScript functions and we'll define the function validate. We'll just put a simple alert in there for now so you can see this in action. One, validate got called as we entered the final value. So this little function that I've created, this is the thing that needs to do all the work with the value that comes out of that control. So the assumption here is that you're putting in some value that you need to validate and decide if it's correct and then what action happens next. So if it's correct, maybe you navigate to a new page, a new tab, maybe you give access to something on the screen or allow somebody to save something. I've seen two-factor authentication used in a lot of places where you go into an admin interface and you start changing something that's important, and the system will prompt you to validate you are who you are before taking those changes, as just sort of an extra measure of security to make sure that you aren't somebody who happened upon an opportunity of somebody walking away from their computer. Maybe they've got the screen open, they forgot to lock it. You've left yourself open to exposure like that. So that's a place I've seen these kinds of interfaces used. But with this validate function, what you can do is do a callback. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just walk through this example here, the implementing the onComplete function. And here we've got this callback. It's going to call this function, this XBasic function called validate code, the definition of which is down here. So let's go ahead and add that into our project. Here in our function validate, I'm going to paste that validate code Ajax callback. If you would prefer to use action JavaScript, you can create a JavaScript action, give it a name, edit it, and then add an Ajax callback. Here we go. And then here you would say validate. What do we call it? Validate code. Click OK. Save that and then insert that into your JavaScript. So you could click here to see the JavaScript code to invoke it. I would copy this here and paste that in. So now you have a JavaScript action. They use it as action JavaScript to make that callback for you, which you would edit through this JavaScript actions interface over here. If you do it this way, it does give you options to easily set all these other things like server timeouts and so on and so forth. So that might be your preferred method of doing this. It does give you a easier way to deal with the callback, but at its roots, all this is really doing with this simple callback function is just calling this UX component method called Ajax callback, and it's passing in two blank values which are not used. You can go and look up this function in the documentation to see what those are, but the third one is just the XBasic function to call on the back end, which we'll define in the XBasic function section of the UX. And what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this guy here and paste it into our component on the XBasic functions down here at the bottom. So this is a very, very simple, simplistic example of what you need to do on the validation is going to be dependent on the type of system you've implemented to generate codes or validate codes. If you're using a third party, you need to make an API call. That all happens here. So, but what this does is this AJAX callback is going to be past this object called E, and in it there's a whole bunch of data, just a ton of information about the component, about the data that's currently in the controls on the UX, a bunch of things. And one of those objects that's available to you is this e.data submitted, and what's going to be in there is the values of all the controls that can have a value, so data controls, in your component and the values that are in those fields. So this says enter code. Our control is called enter code 1. So we're going to go change that xbasic function first to reference the correct control in the UX. But what we'll also do is we'll put a debug 1 in here so that we can open the xbasic debugger and walk through what's happening. I'm going to comment that out here, and we'll just copy this JavaScript code to return and just change it as invalid, just so that we have the basic alert set up first, and then we'll talk about this code here. So the way a callback works, it's an xbasic function that returns some text as type C. That text is JavaScript to execute in the browser, so it gets returned back to the client device. And the way you return that JavaScript is just using the return JS. You may also see this syntax in our documentation or even in the sample examples that we might provide you in comments in various functions. These two statements here in the context of validate code function are the same thing. So you can use return.js, which I think a lot of people might find easier to understand, but you can also assign a value to the function to return, which is what this statement is doing. So validate code equals JS, it's that string that gets defined up here. We set the value in these two if statements. But these two things are the same. We're not deprecating one over the other, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. As you work through documentation or examples in code comments, you're going to see both models. And return.js is the newer one, which is why you may not see it as often. So if we go to live preview, we enter in 111111, we get an alert, code is invalid. And I'm perplexed as to why the debugger didn't pop. So let's try working preview instead. There we go. Okay, so this is the xbasic debugger. So when we entered that last one, it called our JavaScript function, which called our action JavaScript that we set up to make an AJAX callback to the validate code function. And it was passed in this E object, which we talked about. This contains a ton of data, including data submitted. And this is going to scroll all the way to the bottom immediately if you use the mouse wheel, just as a warning. But if we come up here and we find data submitted, and then expand that, this is enter code 1. That was the value that was given to us. So now this is going to just step through here. We're going to make our JavaScript object that's going to contain the code to return to the browser. And then we're going to look at code submitted, which is 1111. We read it out of e-data submitted enter code 1. It's not equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to go to our else statement where it's going to create this alert code is invalid value in JS. Double click that, add it down to your watch window. As we step over that, you'll see that that is the JavaScript that's going to get returned. And then if we run this, the alert will appear in our window. So alerting, displaying a text message underneath something that the code is invalid is a way to tell people they need to try again. But one of the methods you can use in the enter code control instead is this shake method. In shake, shake just triggers this animation where it wiggles side to side. And that model is used in a lot of places on a lot of websites to indicate that you're wrong, you gotta try again. So the way you call this function is you need to get a pointer to the enter code control. So it's going to be this dialog object get control method. And the value you put in here is that control name. The control name, if we go back to the IDE and go over to controls, is the value here in variable name. So our control's name is enter code 1. So we would put enter code 1 here, which will give us back an object, and then we would call the method by typing .shake after the word object. So the method on that enter code control object, and that would trigger the animation. So if we go back to our Ajax callback that we were looking at, and comment this guy out and bring this guy in, and I'm gonna just change the text here a little bit so that's a bit easier to read. Oops, JS. There we go. What I'm doing here is I'm turning this into a multi-line string by using text delimiters that start with this arrow percent value, some value like JS percent, and then it closes by putting percent, the same thing you put in here, down here. So percent JS, percent JS, percent. Everything in the middle is going to be interpreted as string. We have some special delimiters that you can use like HTML that add in syntax highlighting to make it a little bit easier to read what you're writing. So here is the JavaScript we like to run. So we need to call get control first. It's not enter code, it's enter code 1 because that's what it was called. So we'll get the object and then we call the shake method. That's the JavaScript that's going to get returned now when we run this. So let's go to working preview again. One, I'm gonna move this off screen and just click run to let it run. And you see how it wiggled? So that's how you can call the shake in your callback that does all the validation on the server. So quick and short demo this week. I think on our original schedule we were going to talk about the list charts, charting, the new charting, and or the continuation of our authentication piece on building your own REST service. But today we decided instead to do enter code. I would like to now open this up to questions. I'm sure people have a lot of questions about this and in the context of their apps. So I'd like to address some of those.
All right, and we do have questions. So the first, actually, there are quite a few questions here. Let's start out with, okay, let's start out with the one that has specifically to do with that new code control, and that is, can you paste into it? Like if you got a code in an email, could you paste it and have it go into those boxes, or do they need to be keyed in individually?
That's a good question. Let's try it out.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna type some text here. It's 2222, copy that. I'm gonna hazard a guess that the answer is no, that it doesn't work with paste. But we will find out. Oh, look at that!
It does.
It does. I always err on the side of assuming it doesn't work, and then when it does work, I'm very happy. So yes, it does work with paste.
It does, that's great because I think people will often use this, like if they're doing a two-factor authentication, which is what you pointed out. And you'll get a code maybe in an email. If it's SMS, you're probably not copying and pasting because that's on your phone and you might be typing into a computer. But
yeah,
that's cool.
Yep. So it does.
So then I've got a two-factor authentication question, and that is that I know that we have a built-in accounts for sending, I think, SMS and emails, but can those be changed? And the questions are coming from two people who are overseas and are saying that, the US version, the US servers are probably not what they want. Like, for example, in the case of Spark Post, there actually is there is a EU
Oh, I
service
see, I
for
see.
Spark Posting. Can that be changed?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
And in the case of SMS, that's also going to be the same question.
right. So in the two-factor authentication settings,
Hmm.
um, so we have Twilio for SMS, and then we
Twilio's
have
SMS,
email, and the
which is,
email is
I'm almost
configured in
certain,
the email
I think
settings.
that's Spark Post. Yeah.
No, email is going to be whatever you set it up to be. Let me find the email settings in here.
Okay.
There are several options for email. Um, email settings.
Okay.
So the
Oh, you
email
can
down
point to your
here,
own SMTP server and stuff. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can have it your own SMT. So the send from alias, subject, and message,
Yeah.
those are overriding the settings here that you specify. And that the email settings, if you want to use your own, like the Alpha Anywhere application server to send out the emails, you can use internal.
Hmm.
Um, and then what Alpha Anywhere does is make a call into your SMTP server that does all the email stuff, and then and sends the email that way. But we also have Spark Post, and it's not obvious, but you could also use SendGrid. Uh, so if you pick Spark Post, you're choosing to use either Spark Post or SendGrid to send the email. Um, and then we just need the API key and then the email username.
Hmm.
Is it username? I think it's this. I think all we need is just use your key, but you can also specify the from address and the from alias. The rest of the
Okay.
stuff up here is ignored. So
Okay.
you put anything you want in there, it's not going to change anything. If those emails are coming from the US servers, we would need to do some investigation on our end to figure out um, if
Yeah, for
that's
that.
something
And
we
also what we can
control
do
or if it's
about,
something you can configure in your accounts
right.
on SparkPost and SendGrid.
And then presumably also for SMS, we have similar questions in terms of can you use a different service?
So yeah, if you use internal, what that means is that Alpha Anywhere will use X basic methods like send email, SMTP, using the email server that you specify up here.
Hmm.
So the application server will call into those servers.
Excellent. Okay. And okay, so right. So if someone wants clarification on that, send an email to guides@alphasoftware.com. We can talk about that further. We had two different people who wrote in with the same question about that box, and that was after you shake clear the after you shake the box to say, hey, you've entered in the wrong number, would it be possible to clear out the box?
Yes,
Cool. Can you show us how that
I can show
works?
you how to do that. That would just be simply setting the value to nothing. It's a data control. So you can use all the get value, set value methods with it. So let's add a button here because I think this will be easier to conceptualize. Well, understand if I put it here, not in the
Hmm.
not in the callback.
Okay.
Uh, clear value. So I'll add a button. I'm going to go to its click event, and I'm going to use text mode. But what we'll do is we'll just do dialog object, which is this is the curly brace dialog.object curly brace is a placeholder for an actual object we generate at runtime that doesn't look anything like that. It actually is a properly qualified JavaScript name, but it's the UX component object that holds all the JavaScript methods and values that are available to you to add your own behaviors. And one of those is set value. And set value takes 3 parameters. The first 2 are required. The third one is optional. But this one, it takes the UX control name, which if you can't remember what it is or you have too many, you can actually right click on this and it will insert a value. I only have one control in my dialog. So it has made an assumption here that enter code 1 is the one I'm going to insert because there are no other choices. But then the next parameter you pass in is the value. So if you just pass in an empty string, it will set it to nothing. And that third one, honor change event, this is only going to apply to people who are doing something like setting a value in a control that they don't want the watch events to fire on. Watch events are going to be things like the code that decides whether or not a control is dirty, or a show hide client side rule that references the value of that control. If you pass in false, it won't trigger those. In most cases, people will never really use that, but that is available to you. But we're just going to say enter code 1, and we're going to set it to blank. So go to full preview here. One, that's not right. Clear the value, clears it out. So you could, if you wanted to, as part of that workflow in your callback, in addition to shaking the control, pause, maybe use a JavaScript wait a couple milliseconds or something, and then set the value to 0, or not 0, but empty.
Awesome, thank you. Next question, not quite related, but an Alpha Anywhere question at least. This person has a UX component, and the UX component has got 2 controls in it. One is a text box, and one is a list control. The UX, the list control is using in-place editing, and when they save a record in that list, they would like the name that's in the text box field to be saved in one of the fields in the list. The question is, how do you do it, and which event should you use, should you tie into when you're doing it?
Let's go do some research.
Okay.
In-place editing. So that's gonna be like a calculated field, right? Would you consider that a calculated field? The value is
Yeah, because you
calculated
could
from the
set
value
it in which
control?
the calculation is equal to
Right.
this text box.
Right.
Okay.
So in the settings for a field that has in-place editing enabled, there's this event called calculated. So let's go make a new UX component just to add a list, a basic list. Let's put it on the north wind. Customers, let's just take all the fields out of that. And let's keep this, the default settings, so that we won't turn on the detail view yet. You do need to have the detail view enabled for in-place editing. But if you do it to the Genie, it'll generate the detail view as a separate set of controls. So we double click that and open up the list builder and go to properties. Turn on has detail view. Allow in-place editing, and let's go to the settings. So, these are the default settings for in-place settings. So we'll look at calculated, but another thing to keep in mind here is there's also an on-edit save in-place editing settings here, and
so you could use that event to write for your
and you do have access to all the data, and there's an object called new data, and I believe if you set values in that, it will update that value for you. Though don't quote me on that, you want to test that first. So if we go to fields here, all these controls will have this allow edit option.
Mhm.
And if that's enabled, then you have in-place editing settings available to you. If that's turned off, then there's no in-place editing. But if you go in here and say city, let me check the doc real quick where that is. That is in events. It looks like it's in edit. Okay, so it's in the editing the field properties, the events here. So if we come back over here and we open control settings, this gives us the in-place edit control properties for city, and down here is calculated. And we don't have one here, but what you could do is you could do something like return. We'll go dialog object get value city. Okay. We'll just accept that for now. We'll come over to the list layout. We'll just, well, let's reduce this a bit so it's not overwhelming. We'll keep city and customer ID. We'll accept all these for now. Let's add that city text box. City. I'll move that to the top, and for simplicity, we'll call this Boston. So there she count. They're all Boston.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So it's gonna overwrite it right away. But if I had added the in-place editing controls here to add a new row, that would also populate that as Boston. Let's see here. We were looking at city. In addition to calculated, there is I think there is a way to set the default value. Let me see here. I don't think it's in there though. Ah, here it is. Default value. Again, return. So you would return let's get city. Capitalization doesn't really matter here. Let's remove that calculated, just so that we're not
Setting them all to Boston, which is
we're setting them all. Yeah, just so we can see how that works. Let's add the icons there, and then let's see here. Oh, I'm double clicking the wrong thing. Edit, save, delete, new record. Okay. Click OK. So we should have editing icons now. So that's add new record. And you'll see when we add a new record, the city is now Boston. I think this is blank because I had edited the function for calculated and didn't return anything.
On the first one, yeah.
Yeah. So I'd have to reset that to system default. But that's how you can default it here. If you get rid of that and made this like Springfield, when we add a new record, it will say Springfield. So that's one way to do it. And then that third option, the save. Let's first go here and clear out that calculated. We'll just get rid of this. There we go. List properties on edit save. Let's do let's see. If we want to set the new data, then we would do new data city, I believe. Can't see them here. Let's call this one Providence. And that's on edit save, which is not the same as add new row. So hopefully I did this right. I'm gonna open the Chrome debugger just so I have that available, and I'm just gonna move it off screen for now. But say we went here and we edited this and we called it like alpha key 2 and saved it. Notice how it set it to Providence.
Yep.
On that after save. So that's another option available to you, depending on what your use case is. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. You can set the initial value. You can make it a calculated field and have a calculation using that calculated function, or you can use the onSave events in the list properties in place editing settings, and there's more in there. So there's on edit save, but there's also after new row is like there's a whole bunch in here to sort of explore it. So those are where you can go and possibly accomplish that task.
Excellent. So different question, and that is, actually it's two questions here. Let's start with the first one. This is back to security settings. So is it possible to change a user's group membership programmatically?
Yes.
And could you show the documentation for that?
Yeah. So there's two options available to you. I assume programmatically means that they've got some script or something that they're running. But if you go to new web component UX, we have a security framework example called admin dialog create users and assign roles. This is an interface that shows all the users and their roles, and you can use this to edit those roles in your app published up on the web. So if that's what you're looking to do, do recommend starting here. You don't have to do anything. In fact, let's just add that. Save a page. Oh, hold on. Let's not do that. Let's first save it. I'm going to call it admin. I'm just going to say always allowed. We're going to have the most insecure website ever. And call this one admin. Always allowed. And then we'll come over here and we'll go live test that. Again, security. You have to go through live test. You can't use live and working preview.
Yeah.
So here's my Sarah at example.com. There's the two groups. If I wanted to remove them from user, I would just click. I would select that and then click remove user from group. It's going to be a little bit of delay as it makes its callback, and there are probably things you can do to add up like a wait message or something. But that's interface. You can do this. You can also add new users. We'll call it Dave. Click add. Oh, password must be 6 characters. Dave's name is not a valid password. Anyway, you can use add user and it's going to validate everything here. So that's available to you. Under the hood, this is all using the context security methods, either directly or indirectly. I already have the browser open. So scroll to the top here. Let's context security. Context security is an object available on the application server. And it has methods for adding a user to a role. So the word you're going to look here is role, but role and group are the same thing. You can add a user to multiple roles. You can change your password. You can add new roles up on the server. You can delete roles. Be careful when you do that. Because of how Alpha Anywhere's security system framework works. all the security is done through roles. And if you do this up on the server, you are going to have a hard time getting that role information back into your development environment. So exercise caution if you're going to do this, especially if you plan to use those roles to validate access in the UI using the security settings. But you can remove users. You can get a list of the roles in the system. You can get all the roles for that user, so on and so forth. Other two important ones to know about is the user a member of that role, or is the user a member of at least one of a set of roles? If you look at these methods, we have examples. Roles are we use the word you see in the UI under the hood. How they're defined is a bit different, but it was that they wanted to know how to add a user to a role. That would be using add role.
Probably add and
Yeah.
remove. So that, that's one of them.
Yeah, and this function simply takes the username, the name of the user that you're adding the role to, and that role name. So administrator, user, supervisor, whatever. So I'll paste that in the chat window for you guys.
That's terrific.
Yep.
And then a related question in the time that we have left: how do we restrict access to a panel card based on a role? Like, imagine you've got a panel card and you just don't want that panel card to open unless they have authority to look at that panel card.
That's a good question. Let's add some panels. Let's go here, panels. Let's do a layout. Panel card, around. So if I remember correctly, you do not have security options on the panels. So
correct.
If you're trying to restrict access to a panel card, what are you restricting what's the access that you're restricting? So you can't use the security framework to kind of prevent that. These are meant to be like layout elements, different screens. If the content on that card is something the user shouldn't be able to access, then you need to look at hiding that content. In the grand scheme of things, it might be better to have a separate UI that you've built. I don't know how complex this need is, what the content is. If it's just like
well, is it also possible, for example, like with often if you're not doing a panel layout, you're using a panel navigator instead. So you're moving
true,
from place to place. And there are two ways you can move from panel to panel. One is by clicking, dragging, or swiping with your finger, but the other is programmatic. And if you're doing programmatic, then you're the one who's adding the buttons that say what happens when you click on a button. And it's at that point you could definitely do the check to see whether or not the user is in the correct role in order to get to that next panel, or if they just need to be maybe moved to a different panel.
You can do that. The other thing you could consider doing too is dynamically adding the panel only if they have permissions, which would happen on your initial load. You can
you talk a little bit about dynamic panels? Because it's I think it's a little bit of an advanced topic, but it's one I think people are interested in.
Yeah, so let's add a panel header here. No, I'm not gonna do that. We'll put a button. So if you go into Action JavaScript and you find the panel actions, we have one that's called Add Dynamic Panel to Panel Card Navigator. And what you can do here is you say Panel Navigator 1, it's like my panel. Your panel name, panel title. We recommend that you give this information here, but here you can do like JavaScript or XBasic to compute what to display on that panel card when it's added. And I believe like it's JavaScript and it's gonna be a bit of work. But what you can do is you can dynamically add those controls or remove them
Mm-hmm.
from the UI before you insert it. So, but this is action that does it. It adds it. Let's see here. JavaScript function. Let's just make it some static HTML for now. Panel card contents. And this will add the panel. You have to put in a button. You can just call it directly to add that panel. But there are ways to get those controls. Maybe you should put all that content in another UX control. So let's look at that again. That is then loaded. That UX is then loaded into the panel. So this add panel button, you see if it swaps right to left, and it's a bit hard to see because we've got the carousel turned on right now, but there's our list, there's our city, and here's a third panel that we just generated on the fly. So you can do that with dynamic panels. You can
Cool.
also, after the fact, using JavaScript, delete things from the UI, but you'll have to do all that computing on the server to decide if that needs to happen.
Yep. Got it. Awesome. Well, it looks like we've narrowed down our questions here. If people do have further questions, they can send them into guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. Sarah, thanks very much for presenting today. Thanks everyone for showing up. We look forward to seeing you at our next Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast next Wednesday. Until then, stay well and take care. Bye-bye.